Hello and welcome to the interview. European leaders did not conceal their relief when Emmanuel Macron won the first round of the French presidential election. The EU Commission chief broke protocol to praise the centrist candidate. The German chancellor's spokesperson wished Macron all the best, as did Angela Merkel's main opponent in September's general election, Martin Schulz. Now the German establishment can only wait uneasily for May the 7th. From its perspective, the result of the second round will either breathe new life into the Franco-German relationship or give it the kiss of death. To get more of the view from Berlin, I'm joined by Julie Hamann from the foreign policy think tank, the DGAP. Thank you so much for being our guest on the interview, Julie. How worried do you think the established parties in Germany are about the strong results of the far right and the far left in the first round here in France?
Well, in the first place, politicians in Germany were very relieved that Emmanuel Macron was the winner of the first round, and they were so relieved that they even treat him a little bit already like the future president of France. In the second place, however, the concerns are quite big, and the surprise is quite huge how big the amount of French voters is who voted for an anti-EU candidate. And if you take together Mrs. Le Pen and Mr. Mélenchon, there are more than 45% of anti-EU votes. And this is something which creates quite a big concern in Germany, but in the first place, they are very relieved that apparently Mr. Macron is in a good place for winning this presidential race.
We'll come back to Mr. Macron, of course, just in a short while, but to ask you a bit more about, as you said, this 45% or so in total for the anti-establishment movements here in France. Do you think this might affect the way, for example, the far right or the far left in Germany campaigns in the future, or how they try to take things forward in your country?
In Germany, all kind of parties observe very closely the elections in France, and it's the first time that we can observe also a very tight connection between the right-wing populist party in France and in Germany, as well as other European countries. For example, the leaders of those parties assembled in the beginning of the year in Koblenz, and they really showed that it's a common European nationalist approach that they conduct. And the AfD, for example, is looking very closely on how Marine Le Pen is conducting this campaign, and her victory to get into the second round of the elections is seen as well as a kind of victory for the populist right. For example, Frauke Petry of the AfD, of course, congratulated to Marine Le Pen directly after the results of Sunday, and the AfD was the only party which really congratulated, of course, the FN. And concerning the left, I think that in Germany the parties discovered that they have to really address topics like social justice and not to leave this place for the radical parties. And we can see this very clearly in the position of Martin Schulz, who's the candidate for the SPD, who's trying to put this on the top of his agenda for the campaign for the general elections.
One aspect of the result here, which was very interesting, was how much of the young people's vote Jean-Luc Mélenchon captured here in France. Do you sense that there's a similar kind of disillusionment or hankering for change among young German voters? And if so, what is the way to address that in Germany?
Well, the situation in Germany is, of course, quite different, especially in economic aspects, because one of the main reasons the young people in France are so disappointed by the politics is that they could not address the topic of unemployment, and especially youth unemployment. And this, of course, is a quite different situation in Germany, where there's almost no problem with unemployment and youth unemployment in particular. So there's less space for a young movement like this to emerge, and less space for a candidate from the far left, for example, who can really advocate a profound system change.
Let's get back a bit to Emmanuel Macron. I mean, you mentioned earlier that there is a sort of praise of Macron, making him out to be almost the president. But can you imagine a German Macron emerging, someone who's not from the two main political parties in Germany, or is Germany too much of a different environment from France for something like that to happen?
This is quite curious, actually, because indeed the German media and the German political sphere, since the beginning, they were very positive and optimistic about Emmanuel Macron. However, it's hardly to imagine that in Germany, as a candidate, could really get this far without a party behind him. I think what's important from the German point of view, that they project on Emmanuel Macron a little bit this German kind of grand coalition. So what he's standing for the wish to overcome the left and the right, is quite exactly what the political consensus in Germany is for years. We have a grand coalition for several years, and the SPD and the CDU are forming together a quite strong power in the middle of the democratic spectrum, and I think that's what many people project on Emmanuel Macron.
That's an important point. Germany is, in a sense, much ahead of France, because you've had these grand coalitions between the left and the right for a long time, as you say. But in terms of German hopes of what the Franco-German partnership would look like if Macron were to become president, what do you think exactly that Germany wants from a President Macron, if we were to imagine that happening?
Germans put a lot of hope into the presidency, into the possible presidency of Emmanuel Macron concerning Europe. He's actually the only candidate, or he was one of the only candidates in the elections who really made very clear that for him the Franco-German partnership is one essential pillar of his policy. And so Germans realized very quickly that he's maybe the best partner for German politics, either for German politics on the left and on the right. And I think that some of the hopes are maybe exaggerated, because Emmanuel Macron has quite different stances on some specific issues like the Eurozone. And I think he will not be such an easy partner for Germany, but what's definitely the most important thing for Germany is to have a partner with whom it's possible to maybe reconsolidate the European Union, especially in a situation where Great Britain is leaving the EU and many other forces are there, which really weaken the European Union.
Can we be just a bit more specific, though, when you say reconsolidation or consolidation? What are we talking about there? I mean, is it a Eurozone economic governance, a common Eurozone budget, these kind of things that Macron has suggested in his program?
Yes, those kind of things, but also other issues like, for example, a common security and defense policy, which is even more important in light of the Brexit. The other issue is, for example, a common stance on migration and immigration, because in both parts, France and Germany felt quite alone in the past years. France was absorbed by the issue of terrorism and fighting the IS in Syria, whereas Germany felt a bit left alone by France in the refugee crisis. And I think that with a new partnership between Emmanuel Macron, for example, and either Angela Merkel or Martin Schulz, both parties hope to maybe be able to create compromises on those essential issues.
Do you think that the German government or establishment is making any kind of contingency plans in case Marine Le Pen becomes the next president of France?
Well, this is of course the nightmare scenario in German politics, and it's quite difficult to imagine any kind of collaboration or any kind of common approach in the Franco-German relations with Marine Le Pen as a president. So this is really a scenario that everyone is afraid of, but I don't have the impression that politics are really prepared to this scenario, because there are so many changes which affect so profoundly the relations, and where Germany wouldn't be able to make compromises, for example.
Julie, we have very little time, so just a brief final answer from you, if I could. These endorsements that Emmanuel Macron has been getting from various leaders around Europe, including, as I said at the beginning, senior German figures, do you think those are helping him, or are they helping Marine Le Pen as she tries to portray him as this elitist?
Well, in the beginning of Macron's campaign, it was a clear strategy to show that he's able to be in international politics, that he can identify the important partners, and that he's able to meet them and to have the credibility as a candidate to meet, for example, Angela Merkel and other important politicians. Right now, in this period of the campaign, he indeed has to rather be careful on that, because Marine Le Pen tries exactly to attack him on this this part of the fact being part of the elite and being part of a neoliberal Europe that she accuses Macron to stand for. And right now he concentrates more on issues on France, and yeah, it's not so easy to tell if the support he's getting from other European leaders is really very helpful for him. On the other hand, we are in a period where those who are voting for Macron, they vote for him because he is a pro-European candidate, and so it will not harm him probably that, for example, Mr. Juncker very clearly stated his support for him.
Thank you so much for your insights, Julie Hamann from the foreign policy think tank DGAP, speaking to me from Berlin there. Thanks for watching the interview. More news coming up soon here on France 24.